everyone. My name is Dr. Bethany Vibert, and I'm a clinical psychologist at the Child Mind Institute. We're a national nonprofit that supports children and families with gold standard mental health care, advice, and resources, all online and accessible to everyone. You can learn more about the resources we have available for families during the coronavirus crisis, including telehealth evaluations and treatment, by visiting childmind.org/coronavirus. I'm excited to be here again with you this afternoon, and today I'll be discussing ways to practice social skills at home and answering any other questions you may have. Please post your questions in the feed. We'll also post some links to helpful resources online at childmind.org and details about the next Facebook Live. I'll do my best to answer all of your questions, but if I don't get to them, remember, we're here every day at 10 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. and look through your questions daily. So feel free, jump in, leave your comments and questions. And to get us started today, I want to bring up something that came up on my last session and just kind of tie it into how it relates to social skills and how you can practice at home. One of the things that we had discussed last session was setting up a learning environment and setting up an environment specifically that's going to help facilitate the learning and teaching of your child at home during this time. So one of the questions we got that I wasn't able to get to was, what about a specific learning environment? And when we think about setting up a learning environment, I think social skills really play a role. You might be trying to teach your child social skills during this time. You might be trying to teach them math. You might be trying to practice science with them, any of those things. And setting up an environment that's conducive to learning and teaching is really, really essential. So some things that I try to think about, even when I'm in session in person in a clinic, is how can I make this environment as least distractible as possible? So I will try to incorporate things that I want the child to focus on. So for example, if we take social skills, I might try to use a game and have a game available that uses back and forth and turn taking with them, and have that be the primary toy that's down with us on the table or on the floor, with everything else kind of tucked away and out of sight. In your home, this might look a little bit different. I highly recommend trying to turn electronics off, such as the TV or iPad with YouTube on it or anything like that, to really help your child focus on what you're trying to teach them at that moment. Once you have that environment set with limited distractions, I would also think about the setting and the time that you're trying to introduce learning activities. So for example, you might pick a time where the child is already fed and not very hungry, so that they're in a good mood and to make an optimal learning environment. The other thing to consider is how much sleep they've had. Is this before nap time or right before bedtime that you're bringing up or introducing a topic or a skill that you want the child to learn? So those two things, the physical environment, like limiting distractions, as well as the time, in terms of picking the right time to set up this environment, are very, very important. The other thing that I think is important in planning and practicing social skills are planning ahead and having materials and things available that may be helpful. Lots of materials like the right game, like I said earlier, a turn-taking game being available, or even visual supports. It may be that ordinarily your child is able to learn or to interact with you verbally, but when you're trying to teach a new skill, having things like visual supports handy might be very helpful. So those are a few different things just to kind of kick us off and consider when setting up that learning environment. The other thing that I always try to keep in mind is when you're in that learning environment, to specifically think about what you're trying to teach. When we're talking about skills, this is usually something that can be taught or learned. And so think about, are you going to teach it with a visual prompt, maybe like a social story, or pictures like how to send a text message and you want to have a visual picture out of how you might do something like that. So be intentional about what you might want to teach. Again, something I think important to keep in mind is learning opportunities are available all the time. So even if you haven't specifically set that environment, planned ahead, et cetera, as you're sitting home right now with your child, learning opportunities are abundant in every day. So I really hope that you know that you're still able to kind of maintain and practice these social skills at home while we're sort of in this little lull of downtime. So I also think, it looks like we got a question here actually. A little bit of a different topic, but that's great. Thank you so much for submitting this. My son is struggling with emotions. They're all over the place. Any tips? That's a great question. I think a lot of folks are struggling with a lot of emotions right now. I was just talking with a colleague about what an odd and unusual time this is. I think that a few things are important to understand. One thing is to consider how they're communicating their emotions to you, if they're able to communicate their emotions to you, and giving them really opportunity to share their feelings. For some children, these things are going to come pretty easily. They might be able to say, I'm sad, I'm scared, I'm, nervous, I'm anxious. For other children, especially those who are less verbal or have, speech and language difficulties, or maybe are just a little more shy, those things might not come as easily. If you suspect that they're having these difficulties with their emotions, giving them the ability to express them in different ways may be helpful. One thing that I try to do, for example, when I have individuals in my office who might struggle with expressing their emotions, is I start off by giving them a visual. Maybe it's a list of feelings, or maybe it's different emojis that represent different feelings. And sometimes I'll point one of them out and say, I'm really happy to see you today, kind of like this, and pointing to that emotion. And then you're giving them the opportunity to then have them share and maybe pick an emotion from what's displayed in front of them in order to share that with you. So that's number one, I think, is to try, if they're struggling with those emotions, to have them talk to you about it. This will give you an example to validate those feelings. Even if they can't express those feelings to you, you may still have the opportunity to validate them. You definitely know your kid. Most parents and caregivers do. And so you might be able to tell if they're exhibiting certain behaviors, that they're feeling certain ways. And it's okay to validate those feelings. Everybody's scared now. Everybody's nervous now. Or people are sad now. It's really hard what we're going through. And make it normal to sort of have those feelings and experiences for them. By validating them, they know that it's not an odd experience or an unusual experience, and you're really leaving the door open. Lastly, I think some tips in terms of having their emotions sort of all over the place, is trying to also provide some helpful coping skills for them. You can model these coping skills. For example, when I'm sad, I like to think of a place that makes me happy, and maybe go through an exercise where you verbalize what kinds of things you think of. Or maybe they just have a particular thing that they do that calms them down. For example, some children really like to color or draw, and that really relieves the burden of them having to verbalize and talk to you about things. So giving them an opportunity. I love, some of my families have set up kind of a coping bin where maybe they have some fidget toys and some arts and craft supplies. And these are things that are not used as a punishment. They're really not taken away as long as they're used safely, but really they're just available for the child. So when you notice your child is emotional, if you can validate those feelings, leave the door open to have a conversation with them. Let them guide that conversation or interaction, and then guiding them towards a nice adaptive coping mechanism will be very helpful. Thank you so much for that question. That was wonderful, and I know you are not the only one, you and your son, dealing with that. Next, I have a great question. I love this question. How can we recognize kids for their resilience? I love that question because I think it is very important to work from a strengths-based perspective. Kids are resilient. Kids do get through things. And I think one of the number one ways we can recognize kids for their resilience is really pointing it out to them. Maybe they overcame a disappointment that day. Maybe there was something exciting that they were looking forward to that got canceled because of what's going on. And being able to tell a child, I'm so proud of you for how you handled that, is so important. I also think that it's important to for you to say these things out loud, because like you're saying, it sort of prompts us to recognize how resilient they are. So much of what's going on right now is uncertain and scary, and it's really easy as caregivers to try to find all of the things that are, going wrong or are scary or making us or our children anxious. But I think you bring up a great point to really recognize, point out, and praise children for their resilience. I think regardless of the child and their development, there are likely strengths that are coming through now. Sometimes when it comes to praise and pointing those things out, I tell parents to play detective. So be on the lookout for those times your child or other members of your family are demonstrating resilience. It's likely that they're doing it. It's just sometimes we're overwhelmed by all of that stress and anxiety, and it's easy to miss. So I encourage you to really be a little detective. Be on the lookout and know that children definitely are resilient, and it is something that we want to keep on the lookout for. I think that's great. Not only, praising them for their resilience, also praising them for maybe the little things they are accomplishing. I think it's very likely that children are making progress in some areas while they're home, whether that is learning new skills academically or practicing their social skills. Maybe in the past they haven't really been able to play games with their sibling if they've had too many other things going on, and they're doing a really nice job with it. Definitely be on the lookout for those things and how maybe their behaviors or different skills or areas are actually really coming through and shining right now. We know that the more you can point out those positive things and pay attention and reward and really reinforce those exciting, resilient strengths and behaviors, the more likely they are to happen. And I think that question is just really an excellent reminder to us all to kind of take a deep breath and be able to notice the positive things that are going on around us all the time. I'm just so grateful, honestly, that you even reminded me just now to be super mindful of those strengths and the resilience that children and caregivers and you guys out there have during times like these. I think that it is super important to know. So while I have some more questions coming in, hopefully I'm really excited to see those coming in. I do have a couple of other questions that I can address that have been coming up in the past that I'd like to address for you guys. So one of the questions that we had earlier is, what are some fun things that we can do to help our son practice his social skills while we're out of school? And I think this question is actually so related to that resilience question, because I think it reminds us to be positive and to have fun. First of all, have fun. I think that's a great suggestion. So some things that you can do to have fun are things like playing a game. Selecting games that involve turn taking really allow your child to engage with a social partner, kind of in a back and forth situation, in the same way we'd like to structure conversations or interactions with peers, but you're over a game that you guys find fun. One idea of how to actually explicitly target and practice those social skills before starting the game is, again, to kind of keep in mind what you're trying to teach. So if you're using a game like Connect 4 or Jenga or maybe Sorry, any of those games would work where you're taking turns. Before you start, say or remind or teach them the skill of turn taking, for example. This can be done in a lot of different ways. One of my favorite ways to introduce a topic or a skill that I'm teaching is to use things like a social story. A social story is really great because you can personalize it to your child. I love including pictures of the child or activities of the child that the child's doing, or settings and locations in the child's actual home of where they might partake in these activities. Once you have a social story in place, you can read it and then just jump into your game. Give them the opportunity to practice those back and forth skills. And you can let them know that it's just practice, if that makes the situation a little bit lighter and a little bit easier. As you're doing that, you can definitely give them feedback on their social skills. What I would recommend doing is doing it in a way that's a little bit lighter. You're not providing a lot of harsh feedback. Rather, you can ask them questions to get them thinking. So you just went, now whose turn is it? Rather than correcting them quickly and saying, no, 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 don't jump in. Kind of sitting back and asking questions to raise their awareness as to what might come next. Specifically thinking of those questions in advance as they relate to a social story or a lesson that you might have just given them about social skills will be really helpful in them connecting that skill with the specific action and behavior that they're engaging in. So that's a fun one that I use all the time across age groups to try to have fun. The other thing that I think can be really fun, or I think it's fun, depending on the age and abilities of your child, when you're teaching social skills, is to actually engage your partner or another member in that household in acting out some social skills. For example, if you want your child to be practicing conversations and how to ask folks about their interests, listen, take it in, and have a back and forth conversation with them about that, you might say, we're going to try it and let us know when we don't do a good job. Let us know how we're messing up. And it's kind of a fun game because you get to mess up intentionally and your child sort of gets to say, gotcha, and kind of point out these activities. I think if we're asking them to engage in an intervention and try something new, it's really fun and encouraging to them that we're also able to jump in and try something new and kind of put ourselves out there to act out these social situations. So I've definitely had a lot of fun acting silly and having other children point out my own social snafus. It looks like we have another great question coming in here too. So this question says, I'm a single parent with a chronic illness and anxiety. I have 2 teens with ADHD, anxiety, and 1 has ASD. We have homeschooled for a little while. How can we make a consistent routine that can lessen the stress of what we're missing? First of all, I commend you for just showing up, managing a chronic illness with anxiety and 2 teenagers, especially with ADHD, anxiety, and autism is quite difficult. So the fact that you're here is really quite impressive. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really do appreciate your question. Thinking about how you can make a consistent routine that lessens the stress of what you're missing is right on target, I think, with kind of strategies that you can think of to try to reduce that stress. So when we think about what you're missing, that could be things related to academics or maybe therapies or social interactions with peers, maybe fun interactions or meetings with your family. So a schedule can be used to schedule and structure both less preferable activities like maybe academics or social skills practice if that's not something that your teens like, and I think it can also be used to schedule fun activities. So developing a consistent routine can help in making you guys aware that you're going to have both those normal things that occur every day, like school and lessons and interactions with their teachers, maybe getting grades back and forth, however that's working for you guys, or that homeschooling time, like you mentioned, that kind of process where you're teaching them in school, and all of that will continue to remain the same. And then trying to think about how you can also incorporate those more fun activities that do reduce stress. So that's going to be things like social interaction. If they have friends that they can connect with virtually or family members that they're really quite close to, actually scheduling in and building into your routine those types of things can be really, really helpful, and it gives everybody something to look forward to. So I highly recommend both scheduling in those regular homeschooling stuff and practices and any other kinds of those mundane day-to-day tasks in your routine, and then also those things that provide something special that you guys might be missing. When we think about reducing stress, the reason that I say incorporate those things that you might be missing is because there's a few kind of key components to helping us manage our stress and anxiety. I'm sure you've heard them before, but I'll go over them again. One of those things is sleep. So incorporating sleep into that daily routine is going to be really important. I've been trying to make sure I'm getting up at the same time every morning and going to sleep every morning. Even if I know, or going to sleep at the same time, every night. Even if I know I still have to be at work at the same time and signing in virtually is a lot different than a commute, I'm still trying to get up at the time that I was getting up before. This is helping my body just stay regulated and stay in a routine of things. It was really nice at the beginning when we didn't really know what was going on, and maybe those things like sleep, a bedtime and a wake-up time kind of fell through the cracks. I urge you, for both yourself and the members of your family, to try to be consistent with sleep. The next thing that we can schedule into a routine, and may already be scheduled into your homeschooling routine, is something like PE or gym class. It doesn't have to be called that. I think incorporating any type of physical exercise is going to be really, really helpful and beneficial. This can be incorporated in many, many, many ways, depending on where you live and what the circumstances are in your home. If one of your teenagers really likes making dance videos and wants to dance a little bit, that's physical activity, and that's great. If you're really sick of being pent up inside and one of your teenagers wants to go for a daily walk and walk the dog, that's also another example of exercise. Scheduling that into your daily routine, like the dog gets walked at 4 o'clock every day, is a little bit of a reminder to stay on task and make sure those day-to-day chores get done, but it also gives you a chance to exercise, gives you a chance to be active, which is definitely going to help reduce that stress. Lastly, the other kind of key component we think of is maintaining a healthy diet and lifestyle. And it can be so easy these days to load up on things that are unhealthy or not as good, but kind of maintaining that routine of regular healthy habits is going to help reduce that anxiety. I also think that incorporating a schedule and routine like you've asked about is going to be helpful and beneficial for every member in your family. Having structure and predictability is going to be really, really helpful, and knowing you're still able to get in the things that you wanted to do and enjoyed before, maybe in new and different ways, is going to be helpful and relieving for everyone. Thank you guys so much for submitting your questions today. I really had a great time. Your questions were terrific, and as always, they were a reminder for me to stay positive in the things that we can all do to help keep ourselves happy and healthy today. Thank you so much for joining me. I do hope it was helpful, and remember, we're here every day at 10 a.m. and 4:30 p.m., and we look through your questions daily. Tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m., join Dr. Rachel Bussman here to take your questions. Just a reminder that the Child Mind Institute is here to help with the mental health and parenting needs of this coronavirus crisis, no matter where you are. We have resources to help, from daily tips to consultations to the gold standard telehealth treatments. Go to childmind.org/coronavirus. Be safe, and thank you.